live. Welcome everybody to another episode of our Labs Open Office Hour. This time we are joined by the whole entire team, our Labs lads. Today we have with us, I'm not married, William George here. He's our rendering and photogrammetry guy. Down below me is Matt Bach, the content creation expert. And let me see, over there in the corner there is Kelly Shipman. He is our kind of game development and I feel like kind of 3D modeling in a way,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I don't really know how to summarize, but yeah.
Yeah. I felt there should have been an and there, but I wasn't quite sure what it would have been. So, well, thank you guys for joining us, and thank you, audience, for coming as well. Today is very exciting, and is very much similar to like what we did last week. The 3090. It's on the top of mind for everybody, top of mind and top of tip of tongue, I think is the right phrase. So, yeah, what do you guys think?
Good.
Big card. Very big.
Swole is the goal.
Yeah.
Right on.
If Swole's the goal, they won for sure.
All right. So, I am curious myself. Anything out of the ordinary? Anything unexpected other than the size? Obviously, we kind of knew that was coming, but anything interesting you guys want to talk about right off the bat?
I guess I'll kick things off.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing with the 3090, even more than the 3080, is that things are still kind of in flux because like NVIDIA's launched their card, all of these party guys have launched their cards, but we're lacking the big thing, which is the capability of doing multi-GPU configurations because the card is so big. It's 6 slots versus 2 slots that most cards are. So already you physically could only put 2 into a system unless you've got a really weird motherboard or something, but really like you're limited to 2, which isn't great compared to the old, like the 2080 Ti, you could do 4. And the blower style or the weird cooler that it has pretty much means that 2 cards is already going to cook. So, it's not great already. So I think we got to wait for the blower style cards to come out for the times where the 3090 is going to be especially good. Like I know in my own test, it can be good in DaVinci Resolve, but man, once you get up to that level, a lot of people buying that kind of a workstation will want 2 or 3 video cards. And so being limited to just 1, it means that you could get more expensive, but a lot of those people budget is whatever. So
I see.
Yeah, the good thing though is that a 3090 blower has been announced. Gigabyte announced one, whereas like there isn't a 3080 blower that's been announced yet. So we're kind of in a stuck pattern, I suppose you might say, for those cards until somebody makes one. But the 3090, there's going to be one. It's just a matter of whenever they hit the market. And then, I'm anxious to get 4 of those in a system and do some rendering tests. We played around with, we have a 3090 Founders Edition and a 3090 from Gigabyte, but one of the triple fan designs in the office. Sure. And so we did some playing around with dual 3090s in a way that you would never actually want to do inside a case. They would cook. But on an open air test bed for a few minutes, they were okay. And yeah, the performance is fantastic. And the scaling, like in rendering, is really, really good. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, because in general, I think across all of our stuff, in the best case, it was a 3090. One 3090 was equivalent to 2 2080 Ti's or 2 Titans. Usually they're about the same kind of performance, which means that 2 3090s are equivalent-ish or should be equivalent-ish to about 3 or 4 Titans or 2080 Ti's, which means that 4 3090s, if we can do it, should be the same as like having 2 boxes before that you're doing like network rendering or things over the network. So that's pretty impressive. Like that's a doubling of performance in those kind of workloads.
Yeah. What about noise? That has come up and actually just popped up in YouTube. A question from Hakan Broderlund. Wouldn't a blower 3090 be prohibitively loud for creative work?
They will be loud, but like for rendering, usually, I mean, people that are doing rendering already with like 4 2080 Ti's, it's maybe going to be a little different in noise because these are hotter cards, but you're already used to that. If you're the sort of person that's going to have multiple cards like that in a system, you've either already dealt with that by putting the system in another room or just you're in an environment where the noise isn't a huge deal to begin with. So
Right.
Yeah, because a lot of those workloads, like you mentioned, rendering, or for my work, it's like colorists, they're not dealing with audio quite so much. So
Right.
it being loud, it's just a white noise generator. Or like you said, they put it in another room. I know a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but some people, they'll like one of those little like port things that you use to like hide cables in your wall to like go up to your TV. They'll
Oh,
just put
sure.
those directly through the wall, put the computer on the other side of the wall, and then they just run the cables through the wall, and then now they don't have to worry about it. And hopefully, there's like a closet on the other side of your office or
Yeah.
something like that.
or a sauna with how much heat these put out.
That'd be cool
Yeah.
too. I like it. Let's. Oh, there was an early question about the SLI bridge, or NVLink, since
NVLink.
we've since updated to that. I know for a lot of what we do, it doesn't really matter, and it seems like that's just kind of like the industries are catching up to that concept that it doesn't really make much difference.
Well, it really depends on what you're doing. Yeah, if, like, for example, I know Matt's talked about Resolve, where you don't want to do that. You want the cards treated completely separately. But what NVLink does is just gives a faster interconnect between two cards so they can communicate faster. They can already talk over the PCI Express bus.
Sure.
And PCI Express 4.0 that these cards support, if you're putting them in a supported motherboard, you're doubling the amount of bandwidth that has already.
Okay.
But the NVLink is like an order of magnitude faster than that. So if you want the cards to be able to communicate so that they can either share data that happens to be in one or the other card's onboard memory, or so that they can be communicating about other things, NVLink is really good for that. So I think Don, in some of his scientific computing stuff, that'll come up.
Oh,
It can come up in rendering if it's supported by the rendering engine you're using. If the rendering engine doesn't support it, it does absolutely nothing. If the engine does support it, it can allow, like I said, some of that, not quite pooling of memory, but sort of sharing that can enable use of larger scenes, more complex textures and things without having to go out to the system memory that's a lot slower access. So there are benefits to it, and it's going to be interesting to test. But we're going to have to wait not only on the actual bridges becoming available, but also potentially on different size bridges. The only ones they've announced for GeForce cards are a 4-slot bridge, which means you can do 2 cards, spaced out. But again, if you're doing that sort of rendering, there's a good chance you might want more than 2 cards. And so what happened last generation, at least, is the Quadro cards used the same physical bridge connector on the card.
Right.
And so we could use the Quadro bridges that were slotted closer together on GeForce cards. We have no idea, because Ampere Quadros haven't been even really hinted at by NVIDIA yet, but at some point in the future, presumably they'll come out. And if the NVLink bridges are compatible, then that would give us an option for doing that. Otherwise, it's possible that doing NVLink might limit the number of cards you can have, which then might not be worthwhile.
Yeah, and it's worth double pointing out real quick that you said if the rendering supports it, because this has to be supported by your software.
Yes.
It's not an automatic thing. Even like the memory pooling you mentioned completely has to be supported by the software. It is just an interconnect. So I think a lot of the applications I deal with, like even DaVinci Resolve, where people have been saying, oh, it should have NVLink support. No, it doesn't. And I don't know if Blackmagic's ever going to add it, because especially now that they've removed those connections from most of the cards, it's only on the 3090. That's going to be such a small subset of their users that to devote that amount of development time to getting it working. Like, they haven't fixed the bug where if you have your system in SLI, it only sees 1 card instead of 2. They haven't fixed that bug, and that's been there forever. And that's how many of their users might have encountered that versus how many people will be using or be able to use NVLink. Something like rendering, probably more, comes up more. Something like DaVinci Resolve, probably not. Your stuff is probably the biggest one, because those people are writing their own code, so it's up to them to do stuff with it.
Yeah, there's places where it's significant, and you actually, William, made me think of something that I don't know the answer to. If the thing with the NVLink is it's just massive bandwidth and low latency, and yes, you can go over the PCI bus, but a question, and I don't know the answer to this, but you just reminded me, like, oh, we need to check this. Is peer to peer?
Oh, whether they can even do peer to peer?
Yeah, I don't. Well, they can do peer to peer, but there's like the 2000 cards, RTX 20s, they had to go back through CPU space. They didn't have peer to peer over the PCI bus. So they had to go back to CPU space to another card. They had to do this thing. Like the 1080 Ti and stuff like that, they had PCIe peer-to-peer, and so did the Quadros of the Turing Quadros. But the GeForce did not, and I don't know that about this one.
I bet if the 2000 series didn't have it, they probably don't have it in this series. They seem to be really trying to segment the cards. Like even there's some stuff that the Titan RTX, which was a Turing card, had that the 3090 doesn't. Like Linus had a good video about that. Some of the extra stuff that was enabled in the driver on the Titan isn't on the 3090. So I bet there's probably not features that are bringing back. That's doubtful. But we can test that. We got cards.
Yeah. Hey, I didn't even think about
bridge.
that. Do we have two 3090s?
We have two 3090s, 1 gigabyte, one Founders Edition.
Oh, so we could fire those puppies up for in labs, right?
Yeah, we could throw that in next week and see what happens.
Got a lot on order.
We just have to.
Oh yeah,
we
yeah.
just can't plug in the front I/O on our test beds when we do that. Isn't that what you said?
With 23090s, it's if you want the 33080 setup. We couldn't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, production. I think production hates this launch more than any other launch that's ever happened before, because it totally changes all of the cooling in the case. Like, all the cooling is different. All of the way we can do multiple cards. It seems like the shrouds are even thicker. So like the stuff William was running into, where we can't plug in like the front port, like the power switch and the power LEDs and stuff. Like it doesn't fit.
Wow.
Okay. How are they going to deal with that? Do we have to get like low profile, like 2-pin extenders or something? I don't know if anyone makes anything like that. It's going to be, I know they're going to make it through, and they're going to figure it all out. But this is going to be probably the biggest change to how we build workstations that we've had maybe ever.
Yeah. I'm curious too. I've seen comments, there's rumor of a 20 gig VRAM 3080 coming.
Don't believe rumors.
Well, no, I understand that part, but I'm curious. It seems to have come with a sort of a negative cloud that, if this does happen, why, this would be kind of a slap in the face of anybody who bought the 10 gig one. I'm curious how much the VRAM actually affects, your guys' different sectors. Because 10 gigs, that's a lot. I mean, isn't that's 2 gigs less than a 2080 Ti, right? It's
one.
Only 1 gig less.
So what are you doing that could be maxing that out, that you would want a 20 gig 3080?
So
in the have answers for this.
Let's go to Kelly.
Me?
Yeah, Kelly, you go first.
So for real-time playback or real-time renderings type stuff, the higher the resolution gets, the more VRAM you need.
And that's be for the textures and things, or just of the models?
For everything. So the higher the screen resolution, the more VRAM you need. Okay. So 4K, you're pushing it. 8K will take more than 10 gigs, which is ridiculous for gaming.
Okay.
To do 8K, there's 2 monitors in the world that do it, and they're $30,000 each. So why even bother? But for virtual production and those kind of things that are driving these massive LED walls, they could use it. So that's the big thing in real time is more resolution, the more VRAM you need. And you can easily use up a lot of the tests I was doing in 4K would crash on a 10 gig card because I didn't have enough VRAM.
Wow. Okay.
Just because of the number of the size of textures and the amount of rays being used and all kinds of features that people would be using in architecture or virtual production.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing for me. It's like 10 gig is okay for 4K in most apps, but once you get up to 8K, like video editing, in some it's fine. Like Premiere, you can do 8K with a 10 gig card. It's going to be cut it close. Like if you have 4K monitors or something like that, that's going to be also eating up VRAM. It might be a little too tight, but you might be able to squeak by. But something like DaVinci Resolve, it really needs that VRAM. Like we recommend 20 gigs of VRAM for if you're going to be working with the 8K. And so in that case, I mean, a 20 gig 3080 might be really nice because people love to say that DaVinci Resolve like loves the GPU and like, you know, is super crazy optimized for GPU. But it's really only parts of that. Like if you're just like editing a video and like not doing much besides like cutting it and like arranging stuff, you don't need a lot of GPU power. That's mostly CPU. So having a 3080 with 20 gigs means you can do it. And then it's just once you start applying like effects and stuff, that's where like, oh, you'd really want like a 3090. But yeah, it could be really nice if it happens. Again, I don't put any stake into leaks. It's way too easy to fake things. It's way too easy to make stuff up.
And it would seem like it would rob from the 3090. You know, I don't know why.
Yeah.
I could see maybe like later down the road with like a Super or a Ti kind of a deal, but but like back to back or so close to the initial launch, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, they also had the Super cards that was like a halfway launch, you know, this last time. Right. So it could be that they would do a 3080 Super that it replaces the 3080 like they do with the Super cards.
Sure.
And like it's a new model and now it just has much. But yeah, I kind of agree that it would eat too much into the 3090. And I can't imagine them doing a 3090 Super with like 48 gigs. That eats too much into Quadro.
Holy cow.
So,
especially the performance difference between the 3080 and 90. It's only like 10-15% different. Like,
yeah.
So where are you going to price that? Because
that
really paying
price
for the RAM.
is a big deal there because the that memory is expensive. That that's why that's why the 3090 is so much more money because that that the GPU memory is pricey.
There is a big gap there in price though between $699 for the 3080 and $1499 for the 3090. So
yeah, it's a little too big.
I could totally see them slotting in
very expensive.
Yeah, either a 3080 Ti or Super or just a 3080 20 gig version at like $999 maybe.
Yeah.
I mean $300 and the only difference is VRAM. That would be believable. And yeah, like in rendering, it's a lot of the same stuff Kelly was saying. The complexity of your scene and geometry and textures and all that impact how much memory you need. And some rendering engines actually let you do what they call out of core, where it can go and use the system memory for some of that stuff. But that, depending on what exactly is in the system memory and how much it needs to get that, can impact, or will, I shouldn't say can, definitely will impact the rendering speed. It'll slow things down. So if you can have enough VRAM, that's ideal. But yeah, like a 3080 10 gig, okay, somebody gaming at 4K is not, at least with anything current, is not going to need more than the 10. Sure. So a 3080 20 gig version, if it came out, would be more aimed, I think, at the content creation stuff like what our customers are doing, or someone who wanted to game at like 8K, but you really need like a 3090.
8K low quality.
Yeah, I was gonna say 8K low quality, and then realize that doesn't make any sense. So it really would be more of a creator card, I think. And there's enough gap there. I could see it happening, but I would hope that it wouldn't insult people too much if the price difference is big enough. Like, yeah, okay, $300 more. Did you really want to spend that when you're a gamer and you wouldn't benefit?
Right.
Yeah, the machine learning side and scientific stuff, it can be a big deal. In fact, it's often a showstopper.
Yeah, I've heard sometimes where you'll have a job that's too big and it'll.
Oh man, I see
break.
This little message OOM out of
memory.
I see that very regularly. Okay, and the thing is, you can do a lot of stuff, even with an 8 gig card, but that's pushing it. But in perspective, if you look at kind of a lot of the machine learning models, especially the classification, visualization, image classification, stuff like that, those are the kind of the typical image size for those is like 224 by 224 pixels. Okay, that's pretty small. And there's people that are wanting to do classification on big like 3D CAT scans and microscopy stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so they've got images that are massive. They're huge, and a lot of those are you're lucky if you can even get a single image onto the GPU.
Wow.
And you want to have batches of these things in there. And so, I mean, you pretty much have to make a compromise, but it's essentially the size of the features that are being, being learned, whatever, for in the model. And, the more features there are, which is like pixels or whatever, more words, whatever,
right.
it can use up a lot of memory. So the 3090s, that's pretty nice. I mean, it's like the RTX Titan. It's gonna. It's a pretty good replacement for that.
Nice. There was a question.
Yeah, a lot of the machine learning people are pretty excited about that one.
That's good to hear, because there was an earlier early on there was a question about the 3090 versus the RTX Titan. Yeah.
So staying on with the 20 gig 3080, if it happens, I think the main thing is we kind of have to wait and see how the blower style cards happen. Because blower style, you only have one fan. If it's able to keep up with like a 3090 and we can stack 4 of them, honestly, I don't really care. We can keep the 10 gig 3080, we can have 24 gig 3090, and I think it's fine. The people who are going to be investing that amount of money, they're doing it because it's justified by the amount of performance they're getting out of it. So they'll just go with the 3090. But if the cooling means we can only do 3 cards or 2 cards, that's when a 3080, if we can do 4 cards, would be really nice to have a 20 gig model. Because if we're going to sell a whole lot of those 3080s in like rendering or Resolve or whatever. So I think a lot of this is going to come down to these aftermarket blower style cards, and if they work, how well they work, how stable they are, what supply is like.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that'll be a big deal for people that are looking for a replacement for the 2080 Ti.
Yeah, because right now, like if you do 2 3090s and like maybe that'd be okay if you got enough case airflow with the Founders Editions, or maybe even the other style. If you do 2 3090s, you're only going to be matching, 4 2080 Ti's. Now, I mean, those 2 3090s are cheaper and it has more VRAM. So like that's an added benefit. But in terms of like raw performance, at least from everything I've seen in my stuff, and I believe in like your guys' stuff, 2 3090s is not faster than 4 2080 Ti's. I mean, the fact that we're talking about 2 cards versus 4 is pretty amazing anyway. But
yeah, it's still pretty crazy, right? Oh man.
Yeah, that's significant.
I do have to say it is strange to see like this cooling solution, the troubles that we're seeing for multi GPU setups, especially when NVIDIA is so hardcore about machine learning and AI, and really the way to do that is with multiple graphics cards. Is this kind of their... Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say, is this kind of their way of forcing those industries into the Quadro side of things? But why, what's really the difference? Why would... I don't know. It just seems...
Okay. Let me start this, and I'm probably going to hand it off to Don, because I think Don has a lot of good things to talk about on that. But so I think there's multiple things. They've already been doing this. The RTX Titan, there was no aftermarket cards. It was only manufactured by NVIDIA, and it was only their Founders Edition, which was bad for multi-GPU. So they already have started down this road of, if you want to do multi-GPU, you're supposed to go Quadro. And it was only because they did not control like the 2080 Ti to the same degree as they did the RTX Titan. They can't control like Gigabyte from making blower style. And so since there was demand there, Gigabyte just wants to sell cards. So they sell, if there's a demand for it, they'll make a thing for it. NVIDIA, they want to push everybody to Quadro. And there's a couple of different reasons. if they make more money. I mean, yeah, of course. But the reason is like the actual practical reasons is those cards are designed to be put under load for 24/7 and be in multi GPU configuration. So like they're designed for it, they're binned for it more, and so I think that's the main supposed reason that they want people to go to Quadro is because it's made to do that. Now, what we've seen is people look at it and say like, well, why would I buy an RTX 6000? An RTX 6000 for 4 times the cost of a 2080 Ti when I can just get a 2080 Ti, and if one card dies, I throw it in the trash and I'm still 3 times faster. Oh, another card died in 2 years. Oh, I can throw that out. I'm still 2 times faster. Another card dies in 4 years. Oh, I'll throw that one out. And so they get like, way more performance over the life of the system, even though they're having to constantly throw out cards, and that's like a worst case scenario. That doesn't really happen. But so I think that's kind of the reasoning for why they're trying to push people to Quadro. If they could drop the price of Quadro a little bit, I think that would make a big difference. But yeah, Quadros are just so pricey.
I mean, there's other features within Quadro that only exist in Quadro, and it's usually like if you don't know if you need it, then you probably don't need it.
Yeah, like, that's true. There's like the sync stuff.
Yeah, there's sync. There's a few. Some of the stuff that like Linus pointed out. Yeah, that only Quadro will do, but for the most part, you can brute force it in a GeForce to do it.
Yeah, right.
And all of those things that only a Quadro can do are only that way because NVIDIA chose to make them that way.
Yep, 10-bit display out. Yeah, 10-bit display out was Quadro only for years and years, and they've always said like, no, we can't do that on GeForce. It's a Quadro only thing. And then a year ago, hey, look, it's enabled on GeForce now. It's just a driver update.
Yeah, with the driver update, no less. Like it wasn't physical hardware at all.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff with that. And Matt, what you were saying about, like expecting cards to fail and stuff like that, and just replace them because they're low cost. That was normal business in the early days with the GPU compute. I mean, because I was consulting on building these systems back in the very early days of doing this stuff. And that I always told everybody, you get 4 cards, expect at least one to fail in 6 months. You're going to burn them up.
Oh, yeah,
and it was like, and then, that was just kind of how it was. The quality of the cards really, really, really got a lot better. From the 900s and then the 10XX series, those cards were like massively improved. So they didn't fail so much anymore, and they pretty much don't. But that used to be the norm. But yeah, really on that, it's the price is so good on the GeForce, and there's some great performance to be had there. That it's overwhelmingly compelling to do that. And even if it is, risking, card failure or, problems like that, it's still overall, it comes out really good. So, and that totally drove the entire machine learning explosion that we've had.
Right.
Because everybody could, hey, I got my gaming rig, now I can be a data scientist, right?
Yeah, look what happened with folding at home.
For real.
Yeah.
But the Quadro, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Quadros because, there's a lot of stuff that's not, I've got to dig into this a lot more. There's a lot of, I've gotten surprises from some comments already on my post. Some people have given me some really good information. I'm going, oh man, I didn't even realize that about these things. But if the Quadro is more like the Tesla, then there'll be a big difference this round on the Quadros. I'm really hoping that the Quadros will have the MIG, the multi-instant GPU thing. That's essentially vGPU, GPU partitioning on the hardware side. Really, really, really awesome. I hope Quadros do that.
Pretty sure they will.
I think they will. I think they've
been pushing that pretty hard in marketing thing over the past couple of years, and I can't imagine they would abandon that.
Yeah, and this doing this in hardware the way they're doing now, I'm like going, oh hey, that is really awesome. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. So Quadro may be really actually quite compelling this round. but for people that are on a tight budget, whatever, trying to maximize what they can get, man, these the GeForce cards are going to be fine. They're going to be really good.
Mhm.
I'm not too worried about that. My own testing is like, at this point, it's like, whoa, this is not a big improvement if you look really at some other advances. That's really clear in my the 3090 post that I put up. But it's very early. The stuff's not completely supported yet, but it's still, yeah, they're really good. So that's going to be easy. But I'm hopeful. Looking at what NVIDIA did, the pricing on the GeForce, I'm hoping they do kind of a similar thing on the Quadro.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do. Then they're going to make people really have to go, oh, okay, maybe I can go ahead and just get the Quadros. Maybe I should really do the Quadros here instead of the GeForce. Mm-hmm. If they do the pricing that way, then yeah, they'll win people over to the Quadro side, I think, en masse. If
I'm betting the Quadros will be the same price per tier as they are now. Because I mean,
right?
Kelly, you're probably right, man.
The 3080,
Nice.
the 3080 is
I'm
technically the 3080 is technically the 2080 replacement, and it's the same price.
Yeah.
The 3090 is the only weird one because they didn't want to call it Titan because it doesn't have the Titan features. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I doubt they'll change the price of Quadro.
Right.
Yeah, the Tesla's still up there.
Yeah, anyone that is like, oh yeah, I need this for my multi-million-dollar movie project, they're gonna be like, yeah, I'll pay $6,000 for a video card. I don't care.
Yeah. It's like we have a few customers, and I guess we shouldn't say any names or anything. We definitely shouldn't. But there's some of them where like they buy computers for a project, and at the end of the project, it gets destroyed. Like they actually physically will like destroy or like mothball the machine. And so like, and those are expensive machines sometimes. Sometimes they're 20, 30 grand. But to them, it's a drop in the bucket. That's nothing. That's operating cost.
Yeah, that blows my mind. Well, and because I personally encounter this a lot when coming up against our pricing, right? People complain about that, but when like a minute is thousands of dollars, a $7,000 PC to save you 15 minutes is nothing. Is not even a half a thought.
Yeah.
Like.
And to those people, it's the like support side that makes it even more worth it.
Sure.
For us, like they could buy a computer for bottom dollar from one of the multitude of configure your own PC websites out there, and yeah, you can get it for like almost new egg pricing assembled. But man, how many problems are you going to be dealing with? How high quality are those parts? What power supply is it? Because it's probably a $20 power supply. $20 power supply, like powering a $7,000 workstation, is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Let's see. We've been getting quite a few questions in the chat here. Thank you to William and Matt for handling some of those as they've come through. But like, what will the 3080 majorly impact AI development on personal PCs? That's a good one.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Okay, easy answer. Move on. Next question.
Yeah, right? Yes.
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying. It's going to be pretty much a no-brainer replacement for like a 2080 Ti. But man, those cards were great.
Sure.
And there's some things in this new design that kind of caught me off guard a little bit. The most significant thing that I found in my new testing was this massive performance increase using newer TensorFlow and newer CUDA and stuff like that on the old cards. Like the RTX Titan and the 2080 Ti on half precision. The tensor cores, big jump in improvement.
Interesting.
And it's like,
wow.
If you look at my 3090 post right now, there's like, there ain't that much difference.
Wow.
On half precision, and they're also getting really good at doing mixed precision. TensorFlow has automatic mixed precision now, where basically it'll do an analysis of the compute graph and figure out, okay, like where they really need single where they can do half precision and stuff like that, kind of to optimize it without precision loss.
Wow.
So that kind of stuff is pretty important. And it turns out, and this was enlightening to some of my commenters on my post. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. The tensor core, that part of these new cards it's not that big of a step forward. In fact, it's probably not a step forward.
So it's more CUDA cores, less, but not more tensor.
Yeah. It turns out, and you see that in the results. My FP32, the single precision results, which is actually very, very important because that's usually you usually need that for things to be stable, getting better. But that there's a nice improvement with the RTX 30 there. But the FP16 results, whoa, no, they're pretty much kind of on par with the older cards.
Wow.
So, and that is because the older cards are now so much better. And that's in the post I did on the 3080. That was so rushed, I pulled the new data into Pandas, and I did, into my Pandas data frame and put the numbers in there, and I had matplotlib ready to make the charts, and I made the charts, and that was with my old testing data on the big collection of cards. But that was an older CUDA, an older TensorFlow, and so that was a little bit misleading because I did the RTX Titan in there, and you could see that okay, there was a big improvement. But those old results now move way forward. They would all be better if I redid them. So in the 3090 post, you can really see more of an apples to apples kind of comparison of what the performance is like, and that qualifying that's the performance what it is like today.
Sure.
Because NVIDIA just released CUDA 11.1 that actually has support for the compute level of the RTX 30 cards.
Wow.
So even this testing that I did, it works. That was CUDA 11, which supports Ampere, but Ampere A100, not A102, which is what these cards are.
Okay.
When everything gets rebuilt, and I may recompile all this stuff myself because people are really anxious to see, okay, how good really are these cards? And at this point, I'm going, oh, please, NVIDIA, make those nice, wonderful Docker containers that I can use. But I might go ahead and try and do a rebuild of TensorFlow myself and link into the new CUDA 11.1, so I've got full, actual, real support for these cards, and then see what I can do. But it's going to be hard for me to get to benchmark things that way, and I don't know. I might try it, but
I think that's something worth pointing out, or leads to something that's worth pointing out, that you're having all these problems with early stuff. We had issues too. So a lot of my testing, I had to use beta builds of Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve because it didn't support red footage. I think one of the things that we do that's so unique is we redo our testing a lot. Most hardware reviewers, they will test a card and they reuse those results. They might be reusing results that they ran 2 years ago, and they just keep using it over and over and over, and they never mention it in their reviews that they're reusing old results, but they are. And we're unique because we will retest things constantly. We're always trying to be on the latest drivers and versions of, say, Premiere Pro. So if a new version of Premiere Pro comes out, we're not going to test a card on that new version versus results from a card on an old version of Premiere Pro, because they change things constantly.
Yeah.
It's not like a video game where oh yeah, that game hasn't had an update in 2 years, so yeah, whatever, it's probably about the same.
Right.
That's still ignoring Windows updates and driver updates, but our stuff changes so much. So I might have to redo all of my stuff when the 3070 launches in mid-October. That's a month. I might have to redo everything because Premiere Pro, the GPU decoding is in beta right now. If that hits launch and it actually works, I was having problems getting it enabled on some of my stuff, but it's beta.
Right.
But if that hit launch and it works, like that's going to throw all of my results, or like half of my results are going to be completely different. So I can't just reuse old stuff. And again, that's what's really nice about the stuff we do, is we're constantly redoing stuff. Like, yeah, things will change. Usually people think it's changing because of driver improvements. Now, like driver improvements almost never, it fixes like stability and like having things work, but usually driver doesn't give you much performance increase. It's usually like the accompanying software, like, oh yeah, they finally added in this feature that takes advantage of, feature X on these cards.
Yeah, Unreal it posted their preview for Unreal 4.26, because I'm on 4.253 right now. And that adds a whole bunch of GPU related stuff to it. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna watch this, see if I need to redo testing, make new tests, whatever. And that was just came out a couple days ago. So we'll see what happens.
That's why automation is such a big deal for what we do, because we're constantly doing tests. There's no way we could do what we do manually. We have to automate everything.
We have to do automation
trying to
keep up with the software developers' automation.
Yeah,
right? They push out new releases automatically. So it's like, oh, stop it, slow it down, man. Like every month, come on.
Man, that's neat. And thankfully, I have to say, thankfully, I don't have to deal with that a whole lot. You guys, I just have to move along the information to other people. So
you're just here to be the pretty one on stream. Things all look good.
Yeah. Well, I've said before that I act as the audience surrogate. I'm the everyman, right? Like, I know a little bit about what you guys do, enough to be dangerous and to kind of gist it for other people out there. But it's always good, and just like on the Wednesday streams, I'm always blown away by the details that you guys end up having to find out and deal with and fix, and just some of the little surprises that come up in everything you guys do. It's super cool. Experts in what they do are some of the most fascinating. It's very cool. So
sometimes I'm so surprised that I'm called a professional. Like,
hey, you get paid.
Really?
That's all it
takes.
takes.
But I get paid. I'm like, oh yeah. I actually remember
that's the first, man. You get paid for it.
A long time ago, when Puget was operating out of John's house up in SeaTac, I remember the first time, like, it was on a CPU box for an Intel CPU. It said like, only to be installed by a professional. And I was like, and I remember telling Tom, like, look at this, it's kind of weird. Like, I'm not a professional. It's like, you're being paid, you're a professional. So, I'm a professional.
here's a kind of an interesting question that I know we actually were kind of discussing even before the stream, but temperatures. Okay. So we do all our testing in open benches and stuff, which shouldn't really affect a whole lot in the way of thermals and stuff. But the question from Hulk 5001 on Twitch is, so did the 3080 increase the temperature of the CPUs? We've only pushed out a few fully built systems so far, but have you guys seen anything weird or anomalous that you can speak to?
So we don't really do the temperature stuff much up in labs unless there's something weird going on or we're investigating something specifically. But I do remember production and qualification talking about, on the Founders Edition at least, that fan that's blowing some of the heat from the video card directly up right to where the CPU sucks it in, that did increase CPU temps. And I want to say what they did was increased the case fan speeds a little bit, I think. Because the CPU fan is thermally controlled already. So if it needs to ramp up, it will. But to help compensate for that extra heat, just bringing a little bit more fresh air in to the system through the front fans, I believe, was the solution that they found that kept it from being a problem.
And for everyone that's watching, we use Noctua fans mostly. Well, I guess we do use the generic fractal ones that come with the case. But usually it's the Noctuas, and we run them pretty low. And they're already super quiet as is, but we run them in pretty low fan curve. So we up the fan curve a little bit, but no audible difference really. So it's not like we're ramped up to full speed or anything like that, you know.
Well, they're still trying out a whole bunch of stuff here. I'm going to take advantage of my fancy
OBS
camera
look at
that. But like, they're trying out weird things. Like, normally the air would go from the front and then, flow in. They're trying, like, well, maybe if we reverse everything, so the air will come in through the back, through the CPU, and then everything will go up, upwards. Like
Okay.
maybe that'll help. I don't know. They're still experimenting. I mean, something like this, like we stole the cards up in labs so we can do performance testing. They're really just now starting to be able to do a lot of that kind of, figuring out what works.
Yeah.
And we already have, we have a couple of seed units already out, and it's like, well, we know it'll be okay, but it might not be exactly what we're going to end up doing in our own workstations. The one thing I do think that's important for like everyone to realize is how good hardware is at managing heat these days.
Oh yeah.
Like a video card, it doesn't overheat. The fans ramp up slowly. So like most of the time, like your video card's under load, like every video card is going to report like 70 to 80 degrees. Always. It doesn't matter like how good or how bad your case airflow is. What you have to look at is the fan speeds, like how much of the fans having to ramp up. And, and then once the fans hit 100, percent, then the GPU might start getting hotter, and then it has to start throttling. But like hardware rarely crashes due to heat these days. It was even, what was it, like 4 or 5 years ago when we were still doing the aquarium PCs, where everything is submerged in mineral oil. We wanted to stress test the tanks, and what we did is we just turned off all of the cooling and just let it cook. We just ran like Prime 95 and Furmark in the oil, and the oil got up to like 80 degrees Celsius. So super dangerous. Like it was dangerous. But we wanted to make those tanks fail. We were talking about actually doing some, was it sous vide cooking? Where you put stuff in the bag and then you put it in. But what was crazy though, was that system never crashed. Like the CPU throttled down to like 50 megahertz or something ridiculously low.
Wow.
But it just kept running. And that's, 3 or 4 years ago. So like heat is bad. Heat is bad like long-term, and it does affect performance, but heat doesn't cause as much like system crashes anymore, at least on like the CPU and GPU. The hard thing with this now, let me see if I can find that other picture, is now we're not dealing.
This is assuming that the cooler and everything is installed correctly.
Ooh,
I've had I've dealt with some systems where it would crash under load because there was improper thermal paste, like
the plastic cap still on the bottom of the cooler.
Like that.
So if you are getting crashes because of heat, there's something else wrong.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, or another one. So this is a thermal image from a CD unit we sent out with the 3090. And this is much hotter over here than it normally is because the hot air is coming up, it's going through the CPU fan and it's blowing over there. It's still safe, but I think one of the big questions here is not the GPU temperature, not the CPU temperature, but what it's going to do for like all those miscellaneous chips on the motherboard.
Sure.
Those things are important, but there's no thermal sensors on those things. There's nothing. You can only see it with a thermal image like this. Yeah. And if something, one of these chips over here gets too hot and it breaks or burns out, that's going to affect everything. So I'm personally not too worried about CPU and GPU temperatures. Yeah. I'm worried about everything
VRAM.
else.
That raises an interesting thought too, like M.2s, right? They will your transfer speeds are they're hot to begin with, and then your transfer speeds suck if they get too hot. That could have an effect later on too, especially over long term, because like as the machine sits there, it's not just those hot spots that you see in that photo, but like eventually everything's gonna warm up if the board gets hot enough and things like that. It's I feel like there's still a lot of unknown thermal issues.
I think that's a bigger deal with those like triple fan, the aftermarket ones, the Founders Editions, because the Founders Editions, at least they're blowing the air in very predictable ways. And very little of it is going down onto the motherboard. It's those ones that just like are constantly recycling. Those are the ones where I think you have more problem with like M.2s and all those kinds of things. So most boards now with M.2 slots, they have heat sinks on them. But I mean, a heat sink goes both ways. If you heat up a heat sink, it makes the M.2 drive hotter.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was coming from. Yeah. So we have another question. This one's specifically for Matt from Hakon Broderland. On the Resolve benchmark, a while back, you guys did 3 levels of workload for live playback. Have you guys dropped that due to benchmark automation?
Oh, yeah. Pretty much exactly because of automation. Dawn was supposed to help me with something years ago with AI.
I'm sorry. I think about that every now and then. I go, hey, I can try this for that.
No, the problem with that, to give a quick, not take up too much time on the stream, is that there's no hooks in the API for like measuring how the FPS of playback is. So all we basically have is there's a little counter that displays, really small counter. And like if you're doing it manually, you can just read the counter, whatever. But what we were having to do was take a screenshot every second for like 30 seconds, log like what the pixel checksum was for it, and then like have a separate thing figure out afterwards, like match up the checksum with what that was. And if it doesn't know what it was, then it like prompted us like, I don't know what this is. What is this? And we say, oh, that's 24.
Wow.
And that worked okay for our own testing because we can control like the screen resolution, where things are, the layout. But now that we're setting our benchmarks out for the public to use, like there's no way that's going to work for anybody out there. They're better off just doing it manually. And we do that for customers. If a customer like, says like, oh, I'm working with this footage, and they can send us a test clip or a test project, we'll plug it into a couple of systems and tell them like, okay, it gives this playback in this system, this playback in there. So we've kind of replaced it with that customized testing and just done the more generalized testing for like our articles and stuff. But eventually, yeah, Don, again, it'd be nice to go back in and try to come up with some sort of like AI thing of like, but it'd have to like figure out where that number is and then what that number is and, deal with all that. And that's pretty complex, I would think.
Yeah,
so.
It's a little bit, it is kind of tricky to get, because that's very specific application. That's like full, it's like, oh yeah, this thing really has to do this. It's not just some, so yeah, it is a little bit tricky. But hey, Matt, you called me out in public on that. And I do think about it because I keep, I run into things and I go, oh, maybe this might be a good way to do that, that thing that Matt needed. And okay,
I didn't mean to like really call it.
I know.
That.
It's a cool. It's actually a good. It's a good thing. That's a cool application. That's a cool thing to be able to do. I'll add that onto my big list.
Yeah. Well, the hard thing with that too is doing that kind of like AI detection and things like that. You're putting more load on the system. And does that affect performance? Like, so you could end up in the case where we're benchmarking something, but it's no longer real. Like it's in the application, it's doing what it's supposed to do, but we're putting so much or enough load on the system otherwise that it skews all of the results. So it's tough, man. Making benchmarks for software that doesn't support benchmarking is really hard when you don't have access to like the source code and you can't just like add hooks and stuff.
That's Kelly over there. Mm-hmm.
It's hard.
Well, yeah, I'm realizing why like Blender and all them like have released like CPU rendering or GPU rendering benchmarks, but that's all it benchmarks is rendering performance.
Yeah, no,
because that's just like start, done. How long did it take? Like that's all it needs to be. But like all the other stuff that we want to know as creators, like how does it perform day to day? That's hard to measure.
The worst thing that people always ask for is tests having to do with like lag. Like either like using a brush in Photoshop or Lightroom, or like I click on this, how long does it take for things to load? And like some of that, like click on something, how long does it take to load? Sometimes we can, but a lot of my tests, I've started to be dropping it more and more because usually there's no difference between different CPUs because everything has very similar single-threaded performance these days. And that stuff's almost always single-threaded. And it's so fast that just like someone sitting at two machines and like giving their own like, well, I feel like this one's faster is more accurate than like getting actual like benchmark results. Cause you're talking like 0.002 seconds versus 0.004. It's like, that's really hard to measure with like software tools. Someone intuitively is going to be able to feel that a lot more. So it's really hard to do benchmarks for.
That's what I really liked about Sir Wade's video recently on the 3090. Because it's like, it's an actual user saying this feels right. This makes it easier to do my job. And it's hard to be like, yeah, it's a second faster rendering it. Like, what does that mean? Like,
that's why I'm glad we're doing more and more of these seed units or helping, these different people. I mean, we do a lot with Quadro and they're terrific, but we're trying to do more of that because our benchmarks are great. Our benchmarks really help, especially people who have to define like an ROI, like return on investment. They have to justify the cost with like their purchasing department or their manager or whoever. They can say like, well, this is 30% faster, so I can do my renders 30% faster. So it's this much time saved or this much more work I can do in a day. That's super valuable. But for like your own personal, is it worth it? videos, just like you said, with the Sir Wade one or a lot of the corridor ones and all of those ones, that's way more meaningful to you or to people personally. I feel.
Well, and I mean, just from a like marketing and selling standpoint, it's better to aim at those sorts of benchmarks, those emotional feelings. Like it doesn't matter. The data is boring and like, yeah, okay, but what does that mean? How does that feel?
I like data.
Well, I mean, I do too.
I know what you mean.
But so much of that is okay. Well, what is 15% faster really like? Yeah, okay. You can say it's going to save 5 minutes or an hour or whatever, but really what that means is I get to have dinner with my family because I don't have to sit at my desk and make sure that the render finishes.
Exactly.
You know, those sorts of translations.
There's a frustration factor there too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like, it's like driving a nice car or something. You know, you can still get where you're going to go, but it may be a lot more pleasant experience, and you may just like Matt said, it feels better. And I'm a scientist, and I'm try to be rational and but man, to me the feel of a machine is a big deal. And because it doesn't take too much for that frustration to kind of creep in when you're working on, computers are always frustrating, they always will be, but when it feels just like, wow, hey, this is this stuff is working here, it's noticeable, and it improves your experience and your workflow significantly, because that frustration can creep in and it starts like grabbing you, and then your productivity goes out the door. So yeah, it is a big deal.
And I think that's why we focus so heavily on reliability first. We talk about like when someone's like, why should I buy it from Puget? It's reliability and like support first. Performance is like third, because I mean, technically, like a system from us with the same hardware, if you build it your own or buy from someone else, it's probably going to perform the same. Like hardware's hardware, but we make sure that things are configured right. Yeah, we make sure it actually works. It's high quality components. It's got all the updates. There's not like a fan that's unplugged. So like it'll work. It'll crash usually. Less. So just like what Don was saying, like the nice car, it's. Yeah, 2 cars get you there. One will feel way better, but also it has to go to the shop a whole lot less. When your car is in the shop, you can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. So less time in the shop is money in the bank, basically.
That's why we stopped doing overclocking on CPUs, because you can get some better performance, but like the reliability system drops significantly. It just introduces a lot more problems, and for our customers, that's not acceptable. So they'd rather do 2% slower and not have to send their system in every 6 months than get an extra little tiny boost.
Yeah, especially these days with all the turbos built into everything, you really don't get much from overclocking. It's just not worth it. Yeah. It was totally on topic for the RTX 3090.
Well, it kind of is, because a lot of the cards available, especially 3090, are overclocked cards.
Right.
And it's like, well, you just buy that. You don't have to like manually overclock things. You don't have to do anything. Just
that used to be a red flag on the GPUs. The real rule of thumb for compute on the GPUs is do not get an overclocked card. And I mean, you look at the especially like the Teslas, those clocks are significantly down from what you're going to see on the GeForce cards. And there's a reason for that, because it really lowers the reliability, and it can generate kind of artifacting errors that can crash your jobs. If you're playing a game and you get a few pixels that are corrupted, it's no big deal. But if you're training a model and you all of a sudden overflow a register somewhere, it's like you just got garbage.
So I don't know if you guys want to go a little beyond the hour. There are another couple questions. In particular, what are your thoughts of Cinebench on CPU and GPU throughput for benchmarking?
William's up there.
Sorry about that.
He's probably answering somebody else's question.
He may have already been answering this question.
Can you repeat the question? I apologize.
Sure.
Spaced
There
out
we
a bit.
go. It was regarding Cinebench. What are your thoughts of Cinebench on CPU and GPU throughput for benchmarking?
Well, so Cinebench doesn't actually test the GPU at all. Cinebench is a CPU benchmark. The older version of Cinebench, so that's R20. The R15 version had a GPU section that sort of tested, like, it was trying
like
to test what
viewport.
performance in a viewport would be like. Yeah, with it wasn't like anything you were interacting with. It was just a basically playback of a pre-recorded scene. But that disappeared in R20. R20's just got a single-threaded and a multi-threaded thing, and it's CPU only. Now, Maxon, the folks that make Cinema 4D and Cinebench, of course, they now own Redshift. They bought that, which is a 3D rendering engine that does use the GPU, and we test that, and that's fantastic on these new cards. I don't know at what point, or presumably at some point, maybe they'll integrate that in. It's still a plug-in for Cinema 4D if you want to use Redshift in there. Maybe at some point that'll become like a default built-in part of the software, which could also cascade into other things. Like Matt, you were
Like
saying After Effects uses some Cinema 4D stuff. Maybe that'll make Redshift get into After
That'd be
Effects.
so good. That'd be so good.
So there's some potential stuff there like that, but yeah,
Epic
right
just-
at this moment, Cinebench it didn't even test on these because it's a CPU thing.
Epic just gave a big grant to Maxon to develop Cinema 4D integration with Unreal.
Oh,
Hey,
Everything is just going to be integrated soon.
Yeah.
That's
everything,
cool, but
everything
that's
talks to
great.
everything.
That's
and it's
good,
all going
right?
to be just as terrible as it is between Adobe apps.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't know. I don't know.
Adobe's at least all generated all by the same company, and there's enough
Which-
problems with like dynamic link and stuff.
Which you would think would have a better interaction, but I feel like because Adobe's super big, and I feel like there's probably some sort of like internal bickering, whereas like when you have these separate companies who are all trying to like kind of boost each other up, you might get a little
Maybe.
bit more play nice.
We'll see.
Well, then we have to like try to figure out how or where do we benchmark that? Like, do we benchmark Cinema 4D by itself, or do we have to benchmark it with After Effects and with Unreal? And like,
Yeah.
Ooh, good.
where do these things lie?
Yeah,
You know,
I bet. Man, this is really getting deep. But I bet what we're gonna do is we're gonna do big tests for like each individual one, and then we have some crossovers built into those tests. Like in my After Effects test, I do have a couple of tests that are for using Cinema 4D stuff. But it's a subset of that. Most of it is about After Effects. And so like if Redshift is integrated, then those like Cinema 4D ones probably would switch over to doing that kind of a thing. And like maybe in Cinema or Unreal, maybe we'd have a little bit of like, we'd use Cinema 4D projects in the benchmark or something. But yeah, I totally agree. Like, and I think you have the hardest time, Kelly, because Unreal is being used by like everything, every industry. You've got everything from like engineering to like architecture to VR training or VR gaming. You've got it using film and animation and even scientific and like AI. Like they're using Unreal to train like, things how to walk.
Yeah.
Like with AI and all this craziness. They're using it in the news.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, it's
That's
the
super cool.
most like widely used single application that I know of right now. It's pretty.
It's
besides
so weird,
maybe
yeah.
Photoshop, but I guess Word, Excel.
Yeah. Right on. Well, that does bring us a little bit over our hour. If anybody wants to get in one last question before we go, get it in now. I'll wait maybe a minute or two, because I know there's always a bit of a delay with streaming and stuff. So, but just in case, while we wait for a question from audience, is there anything you guys would like to mention or point out, or any cool stuff for the future you think is coming or you're excited for?
I'm just excited for.
3070
I'm excited for Quadro.
Yeah,
Quadro.
I'm excited for Quadro too.
I'm excited for
3090s.
3090 blowers.
I'm
I
somewhat
think
excited.
3070 is
Yes, absolutely.
I'm somewhat excited for his 3070 for myself, since it should still beat the 2080 Ti,
Yeah.
and I'm still on a 10 series card. Just my own.
Same.
Yeah.
Trying to
one of the
develop all these
reasons-
Unreal benchmarks at home has been fun.
One of the reasons why I'm excited for the 3070 is because stock of the old cards is like non-existent. And so
Right.
hopefully that'll mean that we'll have a card that's like more affordable than the 3080. Because like a lot of like the stuff I deal with, like Photoshop and Lightroom, you need a video card, but you don't need a super powerful one. And like it'd
Right.
be nice to be able to really have solid supply of a card that's a little bit more affordable for those workflows.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Hackon in chat brought up the other thing, what AMD has for video cards.
Ooh,
Really excited to
yeah.
see if they can pull something out this time. I was pretty unimpressed with the last series, at least for my workflow. A lot of like Unreal's ray tracing stuff has been decoupled from the RT cores. It still uses them, but it can use anything now. So it's like set up right because it's designed for the new consoles. So theoretically, I could have good options from AMD, but we'll see.
Yeah, the hardest thing with AMD though, I feel, is not their hardware, because I mean they focused a lot on gaming recently, so a lot of their like their 5700 XT just isn't that great for most productivity apps. But I feel like they've got to get their driver support really nailed down, and that's not like a hardware release. They've got to hire more people. They've got to really up their QA and all that. And I don't know if they can do that in one generation. So
Yeah.
I don't think, even if performance is good, like this is exactly what we saw with the Radeon 7. When the Radeon 7 launched, like performance was great in Resolve. Like it was amazing. But one, it only existed for like a month. And we still get people asking about it. Why didn't you include the Radeon 7? It's been EOL for like a year. AMD just hasn't acknowledged it, but like you can't buy it.
So weird.
And like we still had issues long ways down the line, even after it was not EOL, of like blue screens with multiple monitors, and like it never got fixed. So I think that's what I think AMD has to do. They've got to fix their like driver quality before anything else. Their cards can perform phenomenally, or well, I can't speak. They can perform great, but if it crashes even a little bit more, that's just like what we were talking about before. Reliability is key in these kind of like, you know, where you're making money by using your computer. If it crashes, that's money lost.
Yeah, I foresee it only being an option for the single GPU, single system Unreal setups, because for the people that need the Quadro for syncing multiple systems, there's just not going to be a comparison. It's going to be the people that are looking for a 3070, 3080 level card.
I think in about a year, your time or sometime during 2021, we'll see that improve quite a bit from AMD. There's
Hopefully.
I can't even remember offhand where it's going, but there's a supercomputer going in that's going to be all AMD. So this will be on Epic, and it's good, and they're going to use AMD GPUs as accelerators in this.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay,
AMD
so
CPUs are amazing. AMD CPUs, they've got that
hardware's
like
great.
locked down.
Yeah, so I think that's going to force a lot of like really serious work on, especially on the driver side and stuff like that. This because they're going to have to compete for those petaflops. They got to get the performance out of those things and make it easy for people to use. So there should be quite a shift going on, plus all the stuff that Intel's doing too, and that will directly help AMD. Ironically,
Yeah, because of OpenCL.
Because of OpenCL.
Yeah.
So I expect 2021 AMD will kind of emerge on that with some more competitive stuff. But at what level I don't know. If how relevant that's going to be for our like productivity apps and stuff. I have no idea if it'll probably trickle down to that.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. But it's going to be a while. It'll be sometime next year, I think. That it'll get significantly better.
Well, there's one last thing I want to mention because it's curious to me, and I want to know if this makes any sense at all. Das Wax on Twitch says Igor's lab, less MLCC, more crashing, and lower clocks.
I think I saw that. First of all, his stuff is amazing.
What did he
so he's a German, I think, reviewer. So all of his stuff is translated. So like sometimes the text is a little bit funny, but yeah, he did I think it was teardown of the 3080s, and it was something to have to do with like the RAM chips, and like they run really hot. Oh, I didn't read the full thing. I just saw like the posts on Reddit and read the top comments. I know I'm terrible.
Oh, okay.
I should read the content. But his stuff is solid. I think what he was saying is like a lot of these first edition cards have like subpar RAM chips, or they're not made to be run at the temperatures they are. But there's some newer other models that have better chips. So that's the other reason why like buying on launch day is not a good idea for like stability. Because even the cards themselves are going to get revisions in, you know, the first weeks or months. So we'll see. Yes. But yeah, trust anything he puts out. He's solid.
This is the first GDDR6X chips out there, so who knows what is going on.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. There's growing pains. And the thing that I feel like everybody always forgets, like, is that every launch is terrible. Like every single launch is awful. Like go find the Reddit like mega threads for the like 2080 Ti launch or the 1080 Ti launch or any launch. They're all like, there's no supply, there's no scalpers, and everything's broken and terrible, and Nvidia doesn't know what they're doing, or Intel doesn't know what they're doing every time. So this is normal, but it sucks, but it's normal.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll end it there. Thank you guys for taking time out of the day. William, Kelly, Don, Matt, everybody, thank you for joining us. And thank you as well, the audience, for joining us for another Labs Open Office Hour, our special Labs Lads edition. I'm excited. I think we'll do this for our hardware launches in the future. This is super cool.
Nice.
And thanks you guys very much. Let me see. Oh, my normal outro. We do this every Wednesday and Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Wednesday, we bring industry experts from outside the company to talk about their workflow and give a little bit of tips, tricks, and behind-the-scenes info on what they do. Fridays at 1 p.m., we do this sort of a thing where we bring in members of our labs team to kind of talk about more about what they do specifically and the crossover between the hardware and the software and testing that we do. So mark your calendars, Wednesdays, Fridays, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, right here on YouTube, Twitch, and Periscope. Well, thank you guys once again, and we'll see you all next time. Bye!